Well, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Kathy. I'm the organizer for today's session, and I'm super excited to have all of you with us today. For any of you who are new to us, Rosenfield and Company is a CPA firm with a strong focus on the automotive industry. Beyond accounting, we serve as advisors to dealers, helping them navigate operational challenges, manage risk, and build stronger, more profitable dealerships. Every month, we bring together industry experts and thought leaders for conversations designed to provide practical and real-world takeaways that you can apply in your store. So today, we're focusing on what happens after you buy a dealership, the steps and the decisions that shape stability, compliance, culture, and performance after closing. We're absolutely thrilled to be joined by two outstanding speakers today, Bert Morgan, CEO of Morgan Automotive Group, who brings firsthand experience from one of the country's leading dealer groups. And we have Bert Rasmussen, leading auto industry attorney and shareholder at ScaliRasmussen. Before we get started, feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A chat at any point. We'll make sure that they get addressed. And just a quick note, our conversation might run a little bit over the 1 hour mark today because we have so much valuable insight to go over. If you have to drop off early, it's okay, but we encourage you to stay. There is going to be a recording published after, so keep an eye out for that. And I'll hand it over to our lovely moderator, Alicia Webb.
Thanks, Kathy. Well, it's pretty exciting. We have a big group on today's webinar. I guess that Bert and Brett are big draws, and the topic, of course, because everybody, once you acquire a dealership, then you've got to impart your culture, your processes, there's a lot of things that have to happen after you acquire your dealership. And we've got a couple of guys who can talk about it from different angles today. So I'm not sure who's leading this, Kathy. Am I handing it over to Bert or to Brett?
Brett is going to start us off today.
Okay, over to you, Brett.
All right. Well, great to be a part of this today and talk about something near and dear to our heart. Of course, automotive acquisition. This has been a kind of a wonderful, I think, process for me to be able to look back over 20 years at our acquisitional track record. We were just to kind of maybe give you a little lay of the land and a little bit about our group. We're the Morgan Automotive Group. We're based in Tampa, Florida. We were founded in 2005, which seems like it was just a minute ago, but of course it was 20 plus years. It took us 10 years in business to reach the threshold of 10 dealerships. And then in the next 10, we've gone on to certainly accelerate our acquisitional pace. And we have over 77 dealerships representing 28 unique brands, all domiciled in the great state of Florida. So that's 42 unique transactions. 16 were multi-roof transactions. We've done 2 7-store transactions and 2 were 5-store acquisitions. And we've done plenty of twosies, if you will. Our first store was acquired in 2005, Toyota of Tampa Bay. We changed the name from then Precision Toyota. It was owned by Frank Morsani. And I think if you could talk to my father, our chairman, Larry Morgan, we would say that, we spent a lot of those early formative years a lot slower on acquisition, but still learning the business. And just maybe go through a few of our non-negotiables, if you will, just our approach. We're very decentralized from an operational position. So we like to, give a lot of, control and leeway to our operators, our general managers. We call them general leaders. We think when they, have their hands on the yoke and can control a lot of the variables inside of the dealership, that unique operating environment, that they're going to be more motivated, love what they do and feel like they're more of a partner within Morgan Automotive. But there are some things, day one of an acquisition, we're more inclined to kind of rip the Band-Aid off. We know that the other groups apply a different discipline. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it, but for us, day one, we're changing the DMS. If they're not on Reynolds and Reynolds, which is our current DMS provider, we're installing DocuPad, which is Reynolds and Reynolds technology tool in F&I. we're installing our warranty company, DG Warranty, our CRM system, Drive Centric, our vehicle inventory management system, vAuto, and certainly a lot of specific Reynolds and Reynolds offerings in the service and parts and kind of fixed environment. So again, we're going to install, a general pack structure that we employ from a group level. Our retail and internal markup, our labor rates. A lot of places we have guides, so we do give our managers some leeway, but they do kind of have mins and maxes, if you will. Places where we're flexible, store name. And this is, I think, helped us win some acquisitions. When the seller wants their, maybe their surname's a part of the dealership name, they want it to, to stay on. I think, having that flexibility and on the store name has been a positive for us. We only have one dealership in our entire network of 77 that actually has the name Morgan on it. Again, we'll cater to a GM's preference in many cases, advertising agency of record. There have been a point in our history where we had one agency of record. Now we have multiple. Marketing spin will be directed by that general leader. Peripheral vendors that don't fall under our core system vendors. The desking process that store runs, the lane process and the service operation, how they run their BDC operation, whether it's cradle to the grave or, just more of a prospect and an appointment setting type of operation, down to store uniforms. We give a lot of leeway and a lot of choice. Generally, what experience has taught us is that every acquisition is unique. There have been times in our career, I think, where we thought we had a good breadth of experience and really understood acquisition. We had a good team, a good checklist, good process, and we see something we've never seen before. And again, they're all different. Just as stores are as unique as the brands they represent in the markets that they represent. I think a good piece of advice would be to allow for a kind of a 90-day, 60 to 90-day ramp into your pro forma. So certainly, when you're acquiring a business, you have a good idea of what you'd like to be able to do as far as influencing the results of that business and where you would like to take it from a financial, progress standpoint. But again, I think I would allow for 60 to 90 days to materially, get onto that pro forma run rate. There's been plenty of times where we set the expectation perhaps a little too high from the outset. High expectations when you're changing a lot of systems, especially if it just happens to be the environment where you see the most upside, can result in, a pretty rapid turnover very quickly. You see a lot of looks in that department with big eyes, and rightfully so. We have a detailed acquisition checklist. We begin our weekly meetings with our acquisition team and our executive management team, months prior if we can. And then we move to kind of bi-weekly meetings as we inch a little bit closer to that acquisition. And, I think we all kind of try to feel out when the right time to bring on, the kind of in-store management team, whether it's a team that we're going to keep that is a part of the existing team that we're acquiring, or maybe it's an operator that we brought in from the outside and, is kind of sitting on our bench, so to speak, getting to know our organization, or if it's somebody that we're promoting from within and going to put into that acquisition because their leader is maybe staying with the seller or going to do something else. So we also would, promote the idea of bringing your IT team along for the ride and your major partners. So your DMS partner, there's going to be a right time to get them involved in the conversation of that acquisition. There's several places where I just would say that we've learned to be very proactive, I think, on kind of getting close to what we'd call the heartbeat of that organization, which is the people. So, oftentimes in an acquisition, we're going to ask that seller for pre-close access to their key leadership team members, their management team. Of course, we never want to become a distraction, but we want to get to know those management team members, kind of know what makes them tick, how they see their business, how they see their people, and how they see maybe some of the opportunities that we've seen from a 40,000 foot view perspective. In the acquisitions where we've been granted this access, they go smoother. We already have a relationship with the key players involved. We get off the ground a lot faster, but we've had sellers that said, hey, look, I'm not telling my people until we're a week out, and you won't meet them until the day of close. So again, you kind of have to, you're kind of sworn to the pace and cadence that the seller wants to move at. But this is something that we'd be asking about from a very early perspective, once the LOI, and then certainly after the app has been signed. I'd say spend a lot of time on your due diligence requests. Make sure you're going, kind of far beyond the boilerplate OEM reports, sales efficiency, retention. Get a hold of as much data as that seller will allow you to have. Google Analytics, detailed ad spends, traffic management reports from their current CRM. Make sure you have a good working understanding of all the KPIs and fixed and service, their current labor rates, and whatnot. Get all copies of pay plans if you can. I would say this is, one of those places where sometimes you find with the seller, there's what they think a person's pay plan is and what it is in actuality. So I think there's a few layers to really getting to know and understand if you've got current information or not. And then we're going to push for a store meeting. We know that once high-level vendors are involved, that there is always the potential that confidentiality will be breached. And it's not something we like talking about, and it's certainly not something that we like when it happens. It can be both damaging to the seller and the buyer. It can create some chaos and more of a fear-based environment when you're walking in on the acquisition side. That's not anything we'd ever want. So, again, 10 times out of 10, we're going to ask that seller for an early meeting with their full employee base to, set the flag in the ground at the acquisition date. And again, we'd like to do this as soon as possible. And again, we want that opportunity to stand in front of our prospective employees, their current employees, and kind of tell them what to expect in the acquisition. Certainly answer any questions that they have. We see that, anytime you're changing or moving someone's cheese, there is always the potential for kind of a fear-based, culture, and, that uncertainty drives in an acquisition. Rumors, I've heard this about them, I've heard that, and it can be very unproductive. So, having the ability to kind of show them the faces behind the organization, talk about who we are, address tenure recognition, things they might be, unsure or insecure about, their health benefits, preview what the pre-boarding process with those team members will look like, and actually implement some level of data capture, of course, with seller approval, on a pre-board, so that when you are running into an acquisition, you are really moving at full strength and able to move very quickly regarding the onboarding of all those associates. And when we have this opportunity, we even distribute our personal cell phone information, our emails to these employees. So if they did not have the fortitude in front of a group to ask a question or have a concern, we do everything we can to address all of it. I'm going to stop real quick and just say, look, in an acquisition, it's the same, it's the same for us in a traditional car store that we've owned for years in an acquisition. If you have a bad leader, you're going to have a bad business. If you have a great leader, you have the potential to have a great business. I'm going to focus the conversation on, some things day one that you need to do just past that acquisition close date, running into those first 100 days of where your focus really needs to be, so that leader, has accurate data, has people that have the proper expectation, and has functioning integration, so they have the ability to acquire consumers and drive business forward. So I'll talk here on what are my 3 pillars of the first 100 days of an acquisition. It's informed people, it's data, verified data, the right data, make sure that all your setups are moving the right way in accounting, and that you have, functioning engagement channels. You're doing a lot of retraining up front on, systems, especially if they utilized a different CRM system, a different DMS system. You're doing a lot of retraining up front, and you're spending a lot of time with those people, but you also need to take the opportunity to help them understand, what those clearly defined expectations, from you of them are in that role, how you manage or measure success in that specific department, how they're going to acquire that data. Well, where will they access that data, and what benchmarks that you kind of hang your hat on. Now, if you've got bad data, I say here, you're sailing in a storm with a broken compass, and it happens. If you make mistakes in your setups, your accounting setups at the outset, if you have data flowing to the wrong part of a financial statement, that could be increasingly problematic as you try to get this dealership off the ground, because again, your barometer is a broken one. And, and again, same, but different functioning technology integrations. The faster you can install, optimize your effective tech stack, especially your customer facing tech stack, the faster you're going to be able to gauge the true talent of your existing team members. If any of these three pillars are not standing properly, you're going to have a real tough time getting that operation blowing and growing in the direction you want it to go in. And you're going to have a really tough time, frankly, understanding, again, the acumen and the level of the talent that exists in that environment. So let's talk about people for a minute. We would like to say at Morgan, it's all people, because we truly believe it. Again, we think that good people create a good business. We don't think, good business can happen without good people. You need to make sure that you have a very redundant and detailed onboarding process. Again, clear and consistently applied and communicated expectations at every level. Review your proprietary reporting as an organization. Make sure they understand how to access it. Make sure that they have access to their company email. They know how to use it. Make sure they know the internal benchmarks that you're going to utilize to hold them accountable. Make sure that they understand their pay plan in its totality. Specifically, if it's pointed at specific portions of the financial statement, maybe they've never seen a financial statement. We find that in acquisitions, typically, we find that employees say, hey, you're a lot more transparent, than my previous owner was. I've never seen this information before. So a lot of times we're dealing with ensuring that they have a supreme comfort level with that information, and making sure they understand too their pay schedule, as well as their peripheral benefits. Reviewing frequently asked questions that relate to our store operations, our management support staff team, and also making sure that, initially you're celebrating even the small wins. There's been a lot of turmoil. We like to tell people, look, to bring all these integrations together in an acquisition, it truly means we have to break everything first. And that's what happens on day one of an acquisition when you're making a DMS transfer. It can be a very, violent, kind of concerning thing. And we try not to pretty it up. We just try to support those team members and get them up to speed as fast as we can. And again, you see quickly in that environment who's embracing change and who's kind of up for that task, and those that are, maybe pushing back or becoming problematic at every corner. So again, it's all people. Secondly, back to the verification of financial data, making sure that you have a correct flow of all your setups. So again, prioritize the assets, right? What are you selling? Your parts and your inventory. Make sure that all of your purchased parts and inventory are put in the DMS as soon as possible, and then verify that it's correct. So, sit with the GM and make sure that you've got the correct inventory costs, whether it's a unique pack structure, or you account for, a certain part of the internal reconditioning for both new and used cars. Make sure it's correct in the DMS. Book your closing entries as soon as possible. Obviously, you're communicating your closing statements to the OEM, because until you do, you're running without a dealer number, which is going to restrict a certain level of access and ability that you'll have as that acquiring business as well. Confirm that all pay plans have been approved, signed, and properly uploaded into your HRS system. We try to do this as quickly as possible. And, at our current size, we've got a good breadth of management support team members that are able to do this. When we were a smaller company, it was really our executive team driving a lot of these functions in acquisitions. And, frankly, for me, as the CEO of the company, there was a certain portion of acquisition that I was sad once I wasn't kind of, a part of the, the nuts and bolts. now I'm more on the peripheral, and I do. There are times I miss being in the trenches. It's frankly one of the most exciting things you can do in our business is, take something, set a direction, and make it something it wasn't before. Review your internal repair orders. Just make sure that all your disclaimers, your fees, your shop supplies, everything's set up properly. Just inspect what you expect. Run a preliminary factory financial statement once you've got some deals and some ROs. Some customers have transacted. Again, you're just trying to reassure that everything's flowing to the right place on a financial statement. Verify that the historical customer data from the buy-sell was converted into the DMS. This is something I would say that is oftentimes overlooked. Obviously, in a buy-sell, you're paying for that seller's customer data, and you need to make sure and ensure that it's in the right place. Make sure that when that new DMS launched in that store, that you have that historical data. And then audit, I'd say, a month in, 45 days in, again at 60 days in, again at 90 days in. I think the GM should sit down with the controller and review and reconcile all payables line by line. A tedious exercise, but a valuable one, because at this time you're likely to have received bills that were old co's responsibilities, bills that were, incoming on contracts that you've, canceled prior to the buy sell. These are agreements that you already terminated. You catch your controller on a bad day who didn't get the memo, and they're paying an invoice you shouldn't be. And then your new vendor statements may be going to the incorrect place. So you need to have that opportunity to get your hands on them and make sure that they're, mapped to the right place on the financial, but also headed to, maybe a centralized accounting or something offsite that you might have. And again, I would do this exercise, at month end, each in part of the first 100 days. And then, test all of your customer engagement paths. The most important thing is that customer's ability to get a hold of a service writer, to get a hold of an agent in your store, to get a hold of a salesperson, whether it's by email, phone, social media. You need to make sure that all of those connections and integrations are functioning. So test all, your form lead submissions and all your major sources. That means third party, the OEM, and your new dealer website. Verify that all the published information that you can control and commandeer control of, dealer website, directory sites, reputation, social media sites, all has correct phone numbers, address, store name, as well as URL. Keep your ears open too. There's always in an acquisition, especially if there's a loyal customer base, for them to want to test new ownership. They're trying to figure you out. Maybe we're getting an oil change and heard that there was a buy seller. They saw something online. So make sure you're reviewing the social media chatter, the chatter on reputation management websites, the reviews of your business, the surveys, stories, that are, kind of transcribed and handed to you from employees. Just stay on top of that chatter, because there's probably some great actionable data there and some, new relationships to make with that customer base. So once the DMS is fully functioning in service, I would go experience what that write-up looks like. So throw a new co-team member in their personal vehicle once everything's functioning. Hit the service drive 15 minutes after they open. Make sure the service manager knows this is happening. Maybe grab a set of meta glasses so you can, document the experience, and record the experience, and then review it with that team. And just make sure that, from the outside looking in, is there maybe parts to their existing process, their existing write-up, that maybe they're not questioning, or maybe something that they're not utilizing inside of that new suite of tools with the new DMS. And by the end of the first week, you'll want to begin to audit all F&I manager presentations and paperwork process. Make sure that, compliance trainings are ongoing and happening, and kind of find out what their, past compliance level was. And then communicate to all customer-facing teammates how negative customer situations are handled. We like to say at Morgan that, the only kind of really bad, upset customer we might have is the one that we don't know about. If we know if somebody's raised their hand and saying they're having a bad experience, we are very process oriented and have a lot of safety nets, if you will, on how to catch these customers and make that bad situation right, make that customer whole again. So taking that opportunity to also revisit how things like cancellations might work from, previous customers. On the F&I side, making sure that, all your customer facing tenants kind of understand how that traffic flow and how those conversations are to be handled. More on the integration side, reputation, I think I said, reputation in directory sites, making sure it has all the right information. I think one tidbit that we've learned over time is have the old co admin make those changes before they transfer ownership. Back in the day, Google would take about a week to be able to verify a transfer of ownership. And what would happen is it would be a good week or 2 weeks before you could update and get any kind of new information. Maybe you were changing the name. Maybe you were changing your website URL. Maybe you were changing your phone numbers to a new tracking number. You don't want that to slow you down. So I think one little hack that we've learned on the integration side is, again, have the existing admin in that store make those changes, right prior to the close of sale. You might find that your OEM leads are still going to the old CRM. We've learned over time, if we can get that CRM company that they're currently utilizing to, if we can extend that contract 30 days past the date of close, there's value to that. Because until you have a functioning, shiny new dealer number, those old co leads are going to be going to old co CRM. So anything you can do to keep the old CRM around is a positive. Also those current prospects that were sitting in that old co CRM, day one of the buy sale, rarely are they properly exported into your new CRM system. So again, this is also an opportunity to reduce leakage and, hang on to those prospects and stay on top of your business. Inventory feeds, if it's not in the DMS, it's not integrating your website and other sources. We've learned to manually input that data, use third-party sources like HomeNet to be able to drive that information. We don't just wait for the DMS to be populated with inventory. And that's also a good way of kind of flushing out if you've got any problems in your current data integration. You might actually see that before your data hits the DMS. Let's say your store traffic has been trending down prior to close. It's common tale, right? That seller decided, hey, I'm going to bring everything to the bottom line I can this last 120 days, and I'm going to reduce expenses. So they turned off the advertising faucet, and now you're seeing traffic drive up. Make sure you have a bridge plan for day one. And it may involve, not having use of that customer data day one. So you might be talking about saturation mail, search engine marketing, more types of like audience, types of advertising, email marketing from purchase lists. Just, you need to have a game plan to be able to, get the word out and speak to the market immediately. Search engine marketing. We see this a lot. You cancel the contract, but that search engine marketing company is still running ads. So when you fire up your vendor to run search engine marketing ads, they're stepping on each other. They're driving up the cost of customer acquisition, and they're creating a lot of confusion because one's probably going to old co website, one's going to the new co website. Well, if you like the vendor using one vendor, that's one way we've learned to solve that problem. But just, again, inspecting what you expect day one, making sure you're talking to both vendors, making sure one's winding down while the other's firing up. We try not to rely 100% on our vendors' capacity for trading. We're a larger company now, but we've learned to integrate, internal power users, have subject matter experts in the world of CRM and DMS. We will take employees out of neighboring stores that are super users and have them readily available to deploy into acquisition. We like to say that if somebody's an ASM, they're working in the service drive, we don't want them to be more than 10 feet away from someone that can help answer a question. And again, Reynolds is a great partner in training and support, but DriveCentric, for example, our CRM is 100% virtual learning. And while typically we try to get those salespeople in the classroom before we open the doors on day one of that buy sell, having a power user, having somebody that can train, understands the software, understands the programs on the ground, you get to a more optimized position from a prospecting and a desking potential from day one. One thing that we've run into is that VoIP systems, phone systems that are integrated into the DMS can be very tricky. So if somebody says, I've got a CDK DMS and I've got the integrated phone system, I would get your IT team involved very, very early. We've also learned that sometimes a name change and a subsequent URL change on the website side can be a good thing. And what I mean here is that you'll have control walking in of that URL. You'll be able to start your email for that business and assign that email weeks before the buy sell. And in the sense that maybe your inventory is not populating to that new website, you can hold off on a redirect. There's been plenty of times where, it's the same URL and we'll change the name servers and half the store seeing the old website and half the store seeing the new website. So sometimes a clean break where you can just forward the old code website to the new site that's already been launched can be a positive and a better way to handle that. And again, review and audit your initial deal flow and speed from the sales desk into F&I and into accounting. If you've moved anyone's cheese, especially on the F&I administrative side, we've seen this from a CIT in customer experience perspective really come back to bite us. So be careful. And the last thing I'll lead you with is this is a little bit of an internal or inside joke, if you will. I did not write a book on the history of dealership acquisitions, but I've always said that if we did, the most fun or entertaining chapter would be the one on the used car negotiation. And, you just see so many, kind of fascinating things here. And it really, at that point, I don't care what the APA says, right? That seller is representing that inventory. He's typically looking at a cost that includes reconditioning, and they're fighting for every last dime. So they're not, in essence, losing money on that current inventory. If they've leveraged and positioned that opportunity right as the seller, there's a chance you might be overpaying for that inventory. Why is that important? Well, it's important from the standpoint of depending on how you pro forma'd that store, you may have to think differently for a short time and a short window of your used car gross, your per unit vehicle retailed opportunity there. The last thing you want is desk people that are afraid to sell a car because they've got to hit a certain PVR objective. And now you've got aged inventory, which is, maybe one of the, biggest challenges you can have from outset. And, second to that used car equation, I would say making sure that you've got a great turn from trade-in or auction acquisition through internal reconditioning to be frontline ready. If you've acquired a store and you can see within the first moments and hours of acquisition that their DFR is a week out, that's a problem. You have a capacity issue in fix or perhaps a process issue, and that's something that needs to be addressed day one. So again, it's having your people pointed in, I think, the right direction, making sure you can trust the data to be able to make decisions as you go down the road in that acquisition, and just making sure you're babysitting every last living integration and place that you connect with your customers, especially on the digital side. It's been great being with you today, and I think we're taking questions at the end, but thank you.
All right, I guess I'm going to be up next, and thank you very much, Brett. That was amazing information. I spoke a little earlier about this, that as a lawyer we get involved in these things, but to actually hear the real business, nuts and bolts and what needs to be done from Brett here, especially from such a experienced player as Morgan Automotive Group, it's a real learning experience for me as well. But let me start up here. Should introduce myself and thank you all for attending. I'm Bert Rasmussen, shareholder at ScaliRasmussen. We're a law firm in Los Angeles that operates in the motor vehicle dealer space, representing dealers. I've been practicing for more than 30 years and have pretty much devoted the whole time to representing dealers and get involved in acquisitions and buy sells all the time. So hopefully I've got a few things to share here with you, but we first give a little disclaimer, like I'm a lawyer, I need to do that, right? And that's that, of course, we're here for education, for picking up some tips and suggestions, but it's not legal advice. So be sure that, if you're looking for checking out anything that you might hear from me or in this presentation, and before you rely on it, check with your own counsel and be sure that it's applicable to your situation, your state. As said before by Brett, every transaction is unique. We're not going to have a cookie cutter approach to anything. So these kind of timelines that we're going through aren't necessarily set in stone. Can move on to the next slide. We've kind of divided up what I'm trying to do here. Before I get into this, let me take a step back and just say this, that, it really is a hard task to come up and say, what is the post-closing situation? We've got a lot of material it can cover for post-closing, but really the closing and the post-closing kind of meld together. In a perfect world, your closing would be the day that everything is completely transitioned over to the buyer from the seller, and every record, asset, license, permit, contract, a technology integration is happens on that day, and it probably should be moved to make that happen in an ideal world. But we're not dealing with an ideal situation many times, so it really, I think, comes down, in my view, to 3 buckets of timing on this post-closing thing, or at least preliminarily 3. And the first one is the moment of closing. Who owns what? Who works for whom? You want to just be able to say, at least on that closing date, immediately after that time when the money is released from escrow and the bill of sale is given to you, the purchaser, where are we? And there's some tips that we've got and suggestions to things to look out for that. Secondly, you move on beyond that, maybe out as far as 30 or outside 60 days. Did we get what we thought we bought? There's things that you need to actually look at and see that they're in place and they're there, and you have not only the appropriate legal documents, but the facts on the ground that demonstrate that you actually have everything that you thought you bargained for. And then the third bucket is audit, adjust, and adjudicate. And again, apologies for having my lawyer hat on too much here. With the adjudicate, I'm talking about seeing if there's anything that the seller still owes or might owe, so that you don't walk away from rights that you have negotiated in that deal. This, can happen longer, but recommendation is that you're not going to wait more than 3, or absolute outside to 12. You might be running into statutes to APA deadlines, but be sure that you get some kind of real kind of firm understanding of where you are by that point. And then I said 3, but I think after that, we've got the long term. I've just divided my immediate short term up into 2 things here, but I'm going to say on the long term side, we're dealing with a kind of continual need to recognize that you own this dealership by reason of having bought it in a deal back long ago. And until the warranty period runs out, until the period where you're required to provide copies of seller records back to seller if they need them for some reason, and you're free to dispose of those records under the terms of the asset purchase agreement. Until those times come, you still have that kind of overhang from this having been a buy-sell transaction. Let's move on to the next one here. Okay, so immediate on closing day, we're definitely recommending that you verify the documentation. Now, your lawyer on the transaction and your team will obviously be working on this, but that absolutely is necessary. There's also confirmed physical delivery of all assets. parts, tools, supplies, this is a major thing to be sure. There's counting going on for the flooring transition. There's counting going on and negotiation, as Bert just said, on the used vehicle side. There's parts inventory hopefully happen, but you really need to confirm that is all in place at the time of closing. There's going to be loose ends. I have an example that's unfortunately in litigation right now. We had a buy sell, and it was basically as usual, all of the special tools and fixed assets are going to be purchased. Then there's the used car and company car provision. We had one particular company car for this client, which was excluded from being purchased. It was a service van, mobile service van, expensive, outfitted. And the day of closing came, and somehow the buyer convinced the employees that since the buyer was buying all the fixed assets and special tools, and he wasn't buying that van, they needed to go into the van and take out all the tools and keep them and then return the van. Well, the seller wasn't very happy about that, because that van equipped in that fashion with these things kind of built in and in this service van made it pretty much worthless at that point. So we got a fight going on that. So try to keep on top of these things immediately after closing. Of course, employment changeover is crucial immediately at closing. The key thing being that there is no longer an employee-employer relationship with the seller. You need to have verification that termination happened, that transition happened. There are different rules in different states as to what happens with things like vacation pay, sick pay, that kind of thing in California. All of that has to be discharged, at the time of closing or prior to closing. So you need to verify that to not take over any lingering liabilities that the seller's employment relationship would have with those employees. There's a lot of things to be thinking about for that employment changeover, but those things are like immediate, do it now items. Systems and premises, again, Brett went over some of this too, but you definitely want immediately upon closing to have that physical control in place, where you've got keys, alarm codes, passwords, everything else that was supposed to be provided needs to be provided. Going to the next one. Okay, and in days 1 to 14, we're recommending that you verify even more clearly and more carefully, now that you have a little bit of breathing room after the chaotic situation going on right at closing. Verify those assets again. Do a list, match things together, look at stuff that you normally would maybe not be, is that the absolute core business stuff is essential, obviously, but now maybe after a few days after closing, you've got time to look at things like boutique items, supplies for miscellaneous inventories, things of that nature. And at this point, you can start really cracking down on that assumed contract list and what vendors are coming along, and you really want to put into the AP system and have them on board for bills to be paid and what ones belong to the seller. You hopefully have that done earlier, but if not, be sure to verify that at this point. Runoff deals and work in process. Most asset purchase agreements will include provisions that provide essentially that the buyer and seller will work cooperatively post-closing to deal with any contracts in transit, things of that kind with regard to the seller's final days of business, and at the same time also work on reconciling any sometimes there's a provision for office space to be provided and things of that kind for the seller to wind down, but they all basically provide for working cooperatively with regard to bills that come in that are addressed to the buyer but should have been addressed to the seller, or money that comes in that's addressed to the buyer should have been to the seller also. So these kind of post-closing processes need to be put into some kind of operational format so that you know who's responsible, who's the contact point at each side, things of that kind. So we definitely want to be careful with that. On the employment side, again, you have at the day of closing, hopefully gotten the employees onboarded as much as you can, but there may be things that still need to happen. Their initial training, verification of all of the employment onboarding documents having been executed, and those need to be done promptly. So that's the reference here. You'd have the next slide. Okay, cash, this is again immediately post-closing, days 1 to 30. We're going to do these kind of cash credits and true-ups that I mentioned previously. Licensing and regulatory basics. Okay, this is always an issue, and this is something that varies from state to state as well. And it involves when will you have your full complement of operational licenses, permit, zoning variances, all of that. Usually they're in the APA. There's going to be a provision that all of these things are conditions precedent to your obligation as the buyer to close. But in reality, some things are not available immediately upon closing, and you need to, follow what your attorney recommends with regard to handling that. Often what happens is that there's an agreement. Sometimes these things are called management agreements. Sometimes they're called post-closing coordination agreements. But it basically is that if the buyer hasn't yet received their license or certain licenses or permits, they can operate using the seller's permit for a period of time. And this is something that is not only a if you're in that kind of situation, this is a hot item that needs to be kept track of very carefully. Often these agreements will have a deadline date that by a certain point you can't use that license anymore, and the seller is free to terminate the license with the agency. You wouldn't want that to happen if your license wasn't in place. So again, it's very critical to keep an eye on that. We had a situation where had sold or purchased, my client purchased a dealership, this is in Virginia, and they had everything was coming along just fine, entered into one of these agreements with the idea that we just needed an inspection who was coming the week after closing to do a certificate of occupancy inspection, which was a prerequisite to get the dealer license. And the inspection happened, and we had I think 15 days that we would have the right to use the seller's license. Inspection came, and he said, your fire control panel at this place is completely non-compliant. You've got to get that fixed or you're not getting any certificate of occupancy. So now obviously that required this thing to be extended a long time. I'm sweating bullets because not only do we need to go to the seller and negotiate an additional period of time, but we need to be worried about what is the implication of operating for a longer, like I think it was going to take 30 days for this thing to be repaired. What's the implication of operating as a dealer on this kind of borrowed license situation for this period of time? In California, for example, that is like completely frowned upon by the DMV and other agencies. And of course, the OEMs don't want to see that happening either. But fortunately, we were able to make everybody realize it was definitely not, anyone's fault other than, whoever let the fire control panel goes bad for so long. So anyway, factory relations also during this period, very important. There's again, this is kind of the concept of why are we dealing with all this post-closing stuff? It's because at the closing, there is a kind of fog of war. We've gone through this enormous task of counting cars, negotiating all the things that come up at the time of closing, getting the lenders all happy, getting the flooring set up. And when the dust settles immediately after that, you want to look back and say, hey, we got factory approval and we signed that dealer sales and service agreement, and it had some addenda on it. We kind of had so-and-so was working on that with the factory, but let's book that all into our management system or calendaring system or responsibility person's responsible system, so that if you had an addendum from the factory that said you needed to do this, that, something else, you're going to be able to track that and follow it appropriately. Okay, next slide. Okay, in this period too, in terms of the HR requirements, again, I think we've covered that pretty thoroughly. But if you you want to do the cultural and management and leadership tasks that Brett talked about so well as the HR specifics and checklist for HR in terms of the normal onboarding of any employee that you already would have at your normal operations. You're going to be sure that none of those are missing just because this was an acquisition that you were involved in. Records and privacy also important to again, dust is settled. We've taken over all of these records from the seller. Some of them are electronic, some of them are paper. Do they comply with our internal requirements as the purchaser for safeguarding customer information under GLB or other state law requirements for privacy? Are they accessible the way we need them to be? And are we complying with any provisions of the APA saying that these customer records that we purchased are going to be made available to the seller at some point, that they are going to be maintained in a certain way. So you just want to go back and check that early on, because once something like privacy is not something that you can unring the bell if there should be a breach or a misuse of those records that you've purchased. Okay, next one. Okay, now we're moving into a little bit more of a short-term period, months 2 to 4. And this is where, the headline here we have is move from stabilization to structured review. You're now at a point where you've gotten thing is off the ground. Hopefully things are running relatively well. This is the point where Brett was recommending, you maybe target your pro forma around here rather than immediate. But you do need to take a look, I think, at everything at this point, maybe with a view towards seeing that that all of the obligations of the seller have been complied with. You're definitely going to have during this period, absent a really strange APA, the ability to go back to the seller and seek adjustments where appropriate. The time is right probably to say that we should be coming to a final accounting. Another war story here for me, and that's a deal that took place, a very, very big deal with 4 stores involved. And the amount of reconciliation between the buyer and the seller post-closing went on probably about 6 months before anybody actually said, let's take a look at who owes what to whom. And after that point, there were exchanges of these enormous spreadsheets with hundreds of line items that were on there, not just the ordinary stuff like, we paid your bill or you took our money, but they started having basically the team who was supposed to be reconciling things like that started also throwing in things like, oh, you didn't order a full allocation of vehicles, so we missed profit on what we could have made, and oh, we had to repair this or that. So they were kind of taking over my job, as the lawyer who's supposed to be the one making actual indemnification claims. They were just throwing them in to the reconciliation bucket, and it turned out to make a mess because they kept kind of negotiating it back and forth for a while, and by the time we were called in, they already had this huge spreadsheet I just mentioned, and it was also to the point where there had been some negotiations like, yes, we'll pay that, we won't pay that. So it became a real mess. So this whole process for these kind of reconciliations needs to be started early, right after closing, within 30 days at least, if not earlier. And secondly, it should be kind of brought to a close, right, by some point where you're going to be able to say, we expect a final reconciliation of all these post-closing things at a certain point. All right. And financial and contract audit, same situation here, that we're back looking at those contracts and agreements that we assumed, and being sure that things have been properly onboarded. So it's a bit of a internal audit that you would do to get some of these post-closing items finalized. All right, next slide. And we're also recommending that kind of review for HR and compliance. Especially, this is critical for those of you who might be involved in a purchase of stores or a store out of your home state, where you're maybe not quite as familiar with the F&I processes, privacy policies, even your rights relative to the OEM. So you want to be sure to revisit those things. Reps and warranties too, month 6 to 9 here. You want to take a look. I am serious that, your best bet is to have a calm and harmonious relationship with the seller at all times. But you did, pay for everything that you bought. You did pay for an APA to be negotiated with certain terms. So you want to revisit that and see that everything that was represented is actually come to pass now that you're out about 6 months. Okay, next, please. And again, the APAs generally provide for some kind of a run out of a expiration date, if you will, on the reps and warranties and indemnity obligations that have been made by the seller. So you do want to calendar, of course, that date. And in preparation of that date, you want to keep a log of things that might be worth considering that. Things aren't going the right way in a certain department or in a certain area with regard to CRM data or customer list data. Historical performance doesn't seem to be even close. You want to keep a log of that and investigate, and if it gets to the point, make a final decision if you're going to make a call on that to the seller or not before the deadlines in these documents, because they, if there's escrow money held back, if there's an indemnity deadline, if there's a survival of warranty deadline, you definitely want to not let that go by, not knowing that you even, might have a claim. Okay, next slide. Okay, so on the long term, kind of 1 to 5 years, again, the indemnity claim or warranty survival claim that I talked about is somewhere, normally, the deals I see is negotiated anywhere between 18 months and 3 years. So that's where the 1 to 3 year legacy risk, that you want to be sure that these kind of major things that there be exposure for in terms of, environmental warranties or, somehow litigation that's ensnared you as the buyer that should be completely handled by the seller, are looked at and a claim made where appropriate. Once you get beyond that issue, your next issue is probably that records access right that the seller has, and usually it's tied into a obligation for the buyer not to destroy certain records, no matter how old they are, until a certain number of years go by post-closing, usually no more than 5, but sometimes it's more. In California, we have a statute that requires certain F&I docs to be maintained for 7 years, so we can see that. So, that's it's kind of like the point where you're finally, like I said at the beginning, getting done with the legacy of having acquired this dealership from the seller. Okay, the next one. Okay, so again, our main kind of point on all of this is that, you should get legal control and immediate control of the dealership on day one. Obviously, you should quickly verify that the economic deal matches what's in the agreement and try to persevere through all of the seller cooperative relationships or obligations that you have in terms of runoff, in terms of reconciliation on AR and AP, and then be sure to use your protections that you negotiated in the deal before they expire. So that's about it for now. Thank you very much. I think we're going to take some questions.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, we've had a shy audience today, so we don't have any questions from you guys yet. Alicia, do you have any questions for us?
You know me, I always have questions. So, I was like taking little notes and putting questions here. Bert, so you gave us so much great and very detailed information, and it occurred to me that it's a lot. So does Morgan Automotive have a special team that only handles this kind of transition to new ownership?
No. I mean, with the, I think there'd be a lot of waste in that, in the sense that, acquisitions can be very unpredictable, and just completing this exercise and looking at our track record, we've had years where we've done, 12, and years that we've done, 3. So, just not knowing when the right opportunities are going to be around the corner. Everyone who's on our acquisition team has, a day job here at Morgan. As we've grown and have more regional support players, we are able to, potentially take individuals that, they're ultimately going to be assigned that store regardless. So it's a little bit more seamless, but we don't, have, singularly designated, acquisition team members per se.
I have more questions for you, but I want to be fair. So I question for you, Bert. So you've given us some great examples that y'all have seen, that actually occur in cases you're dealing with. Talk to me about long term. What are some of the biggest issues that you have actually seen raise their ugly head in the long term, more than a year after you've acquired a dealership, when you would hopefully just be happily operating and improving the dealership's operations?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, on a longer term basis, it's usually things that would come up would have to do with probably things connected to the real estate or the facility. There could be some environmental issue. There could be some, oftentimes what happens in things is that, the acquiring party wants to get the real estate along with the dealership, but it's not available yet. And there's going to be, a short lease for certain period of time, could be 2 years, could be 10 years, and then there's an option to purchase. So we kind of like jump back into the entire team, that was involved in the buy sell, to do it again on the option. And then oftentimes there's some kind of issue about the appraisal, if it's being purchased at a then current appraised value, things of that nature. In terms of the, kind of, it's in this program, we're trying to say what you should do in the normal case. And that's why I was trying to stress, just keep your eye on things and don't let deadlines fall and that kind of thing. But in the real world, I think where there's disputes, usually what happens is that there's some kind of idea that, there was a factory announcement, say, for example, that the seller got but never told the buyer. And now the buyer is coming head on, being hit with this head on, and goes back to the seller and starts saying what the heck happened, and then potentially that turns into a dispute. We've seen things like that. ROFRs also tend to sometimes cause some trouble that ends up in some longer term fights. But typically I'd say the most common thing involves, maybe some problem with the real estate that shows up, later.
Any questions from the audience? Because I have a follow-up question for Bert.
We actually have one question, yes,
Yay!
from Brady Simpson. This is for Bret. When you take over a store, how do you approach prioritizing facility or OEM image updates without disrupting day-to-day operations? Is there a sequence you found that works best?
Yeah, but there's not really a one size fits all sequence. And I think you just have to let common sense rule. I was actually going to make the point, about kind of longer term, challenges that can stem from an acquisition. I can think of, a large scale acquisition where it was multiple rooftops on a set campus, that were, I'd say the majority of those dealerships were facing or staring down OEM requirements. And, I would just say, to any potential buyer, don't be fooled or optimistic or get caught, fishing at the well of wishful thinking where you think you're going to be able to stave off, the manufacturer in a sense just because the seller did, because that's not always, the case. But, every, remodel, new dealership, new facility build, capacity expansion is unique. I think typically what we tell you is that if you can do it in stages so that, only one portion of the dealership environment is truly compromised at any given time, that's of real value, where, you don't have teams that are permanently in trailers, or undergoing permanent, issues. So as surgical as you can get, and that would be more specifically related to a remodel, and kind of stage out the work so that there's just not a broad negative effect or disturbance to the whole environment.
Thank you. We actually have one more question for you from Ken Rosenfield. What is the turnaround point for you? When do you walk away from a deal?
That's a great question. We've only ever walked away from one, and it was because essentially the deal was retraded at the closing table. So I think that's a good indication. If somebody's trying to retrade something they've already agreed to, I think that's a red flag and maybe a potential time, a good time to walk away. But again, it depends on what the issue is. If it's, something that's significant or not, or if it's, something that is just near and dear to the seller and maybe something you should get flexible on. And I would say, too, if there's just something that comes up late from a disclosure perspective, and Bert probably would move along these lines too, it would have to be something, I think, fairly substantial and significant, and something in which the seller, would not be assigning, any value there, or there'd be some level of disagreement there that's just the variance is so large that you have to walk away. Bert,
Right.
you want to
Thank
take
you.
that one too?
Yeah, no, I mean, hopefully that would have happened before the diligence expired, but but nevertheless, it does come up, and sometimes it's on the craziest thing. So even the new car pricing often, is like we have this giant word salad of the definition in the APA of what it is you're supposed to deduct, but then it comes down to it, and it's like, well, I don't think that thing is really an incentive. It's a marketing fee or something, so it's I've seen that happen at the closing table, but usually they go out and have a walk and come back and work it out, but it has happened. The other thing I'd ask you too, Brett, on is the OEM, situation. Sometimes we'll draft the APA, that says it's the factory consent is acceptable to buyer and buyer's absolute discretion. And sometimes it says reasonable, has this language, but then the OEMs uses the buy sell as an occasion to say, here, these guys were laggards. You've got to build a new facility in 12 months or something. Do you ever run into that and have to think about walking?
Florida's got pretty, fair and supreme, franchise laws that are very, far protective on the dealer side. So we've never really run it. We try to be fair. We really do try to be fair. And when the OE is able to make a substantial, just a good case, basis, and we think it would be additive to our business, we try to be as open-minded as possible. Now with 77 stores, and our chairman deals with this on a daily basis, just managing, scheduling, staying on top of all that CapEx, it can be a very, cumbersome, time consuming, thing. And one thing I wanted to go back to is, on that used car appraisal, because that can be, there's been times I thought a deal or two were going to blow up over a disagreement on used car values. Is I would implore you to, have that conversation and appraise those vehicles days leading into the close. You can always reconcile any vehicles that they've taken in on trade and any vehicles that they've sold in that meantime. But, to be able to have those conversations proactively and not be waiting on someone in your organization to touch a car or know that a car can't be found, those kinds of things can really slow down a close. Just from an asset management, kind of where is it, what's it worth perspective. So just be as proactive as you can.
That makes sense. I've seen that more when I first started practicing. It was basically they would use a, and this is before it was even online, but say use Kelley Blue Book, and that's what we're going to buy the used at. And they just said they would. Then it moved to the no, we'll negotiate the price at closing, and that's it. And that's held for a long, long time. And now I'm seeing it come back and saying, well, that's true, negotiate closing, but we'll use as a basis MMR or something like that. Do you ever see those things helping, or is it still the same?
Oh, I still feel like it gets very subjective, and
Yeah.
and I understand it too. Even MMR, we, for some vehicles, we call it the meaningless market report, because it's really not. The other day I was appraising my own car, a Toyota that I bought, and there were only 4 pieces of data in Mannheim, and 3 of them were exporter purchases going to the islands. So was that car really worth more than MSRP? Probably not. Yeah, but you see things like that, and look, everyone's a used car expert who's ever, spent time in retail, and you just kind of have to hash it out. And, I understand it too. They've already, potentially made the investment in reconditioning and 90% of that inventory. And look, it's convenient for the seller, right? You don't want to have to run to the sale and buy inventory. And if you have to overpay for it, it's, it's sitting right there on the lot. You kind of grin and bear it, get through it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. We have another question, but keep them coming, guys. This one is from Manuel Maldonado. How do you manage potential future chargebacks, repos to minimize your exposure as a buyer? With terms of loans lengthening, there is more risk in this area.
Yeah, I would say, that's really kind of unrelated to acquisition in the sense that, chargebacks, repossessions are going to follow Oldco. They're, going to follow follow with the seller. I think, to answer that question, you have to run a responsible business, and ensure that we don't do a ton of subprime as a, we have stores that are great at subprime. They understand it, but we don't force it upon our used car operators or new car operators that don't have, the personnel to understand it. So I would say, on that side, just make sure you have, good finance directors that understand compliance and disclosures. And on the used car side, if you're doing a lot of subprime, again, just make sure your folks are doing it by the book. And it's really as simple as that. Just be responsible.
Yeah, that I agree completely. And my only thought came to my mind on this is that sometimes you'll have a if it is the seller's responsibility, which it is, on these prior retail deals, you've got to think about if your indemnity provision has some kind of a big basket, where it doesn't have to reach this until you get claims worth $50,000 or something. You might want to say, well, that excludes, seller's going to handle no matter what these kind of chargeback in case there's some kind of misnaming going on. I've got to make a call right after this webinar to a client, as a Mercedes dealer who, Mercedes obligates you to name the store just, Mercedes city name. That's it. So the buyer and the seller's name never really changes as far as the DBA goes. And that means all the lawyers and other people, think that it's the same entity and they just sue, the buyer when it should be the seller. So on those things, hopefully it'll all be explainable and work out, but you might want to have a little provision that kind of carves that out from the normal indemnity, stuff like assets not being in good condition. Okay, fine. We'll have a threshold of $50,000, but for, something like that, the nuts and bolts stuff, just carve it out of the basket.
All right. Looks like we don't have any more questions from our audience right now. But Alicia, do you want to ask anything else before we wrap up the session?
We've been on here a while. Again, I always have questions. Interestingly, a question that I did have was related to facility requirements and shouldn't those be confirmed before closing? Because one of the things that Bert mentioned you should do, after is to, make sure you're meeting OE requirements in terms of facility. But I think y'all addressed that. It was interesting to me that real estate was a really big topic of discussion in terms of, both pre and post closing. So we all know that at the end of the day, the retail automotive business is a real estate business, right? That's the biggest part of it. I guess I'm good. Thank you guys. This was amazing. A lot of really great information. So thanks so much for taking time to impart your knowledge.
Well, thank you for plotting this subject and bringing Bert and myself along for the ride. I know I enjoyed it.
Thank you as well for me. And thank you, Brett. And thank you, Alicia and Kathy. I really appreciate the invite.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you to you both and for sharing all of your insight, and to everyone who joined us today, especially if you're still here with us through the end. I really hope this discussion gave you guys all some practical ideas on how to navigate, after an acquisition. If you want to continue the conversation, contact information is here on this slide. But you feel free to contact our team. We're always happy to support you and your dealership. And if you have any webinar topics that you'd like to see us cover next, please send them our way. This really helps guide our sessions. Just a quick reminder, recording of today's session along with this slide deck is going to be available soon. So keep an eye out for that. And on behalf of all of us at Rosenfield, thank you again for spending your time with us. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.